Thank you, Joe. Thank you, all of you who journeyed to this town in the middle of July, where I notice it seems to be below the average temperature, which is usually 102 degrees Fahrenheit. I am president of the Earth-Free Institute, which is dedicated to using algae to make food, feed, and fuel. We are taking research that we have spent more than $10 million on over the past 7 years from our associated company, Live Fuels, which worked with the national labs, NREL and Sandia, to figure out, could you really make algae into cheap fuel? And while you're at it, make food and feed as well. Like many of you, I have been to hundreds of conferences, probably over 1,000 conferences. I do not remember attending a plenary session with keynote speakers who were more compelling than these two. I first heard Patrick Moore speak at a biotechnology industry organization meeting 6 years ago, where he pointed out that Canada was transgressing Kyoto, the Kyoto Protocol, more egregiously than anyone else on Earth. That was a revelation to me. And because of the work that we do, I've been paying attention when he speaks. We wished to give him, to honor him, although he needs no honor from us. We wished to honor him because in February he stood up again and spoke to Congress and told the truth. If you wish to see, you can find his testimony on the net. You can also find it in the back of his book. I'm having a wonderful time with this book. For those of you who have not yet seen or purchased Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, he's actually quite polite about some of the doings of his former colleagues. And parenthetically, I'd like to say one thing about John Coleman, which is in our world, Earth-Free and Live Fuels world of algae on land and in the ocean, Roger Revelle is a giant. In the world of oceanography, his name is right up there in the pantheon. And I did not know all the things that John Coleman told us today, but I wonder if one of the reasons that Roger Revelle had a change of heart was because of the things he knew about the ocean from his time at Scripps. He would have known that while the atmosphere is, depending on how you measure it, 65 miles, 350 miles high, it only contains as much heat as the top 10 feet of the ocean because of the specific heat capacity of water, which is 4,000 times that of air. He would have known that if the ocean burped, it could release more heat than we do on purpose. He would have known about ocean circulation patterns, which many of you are probably aware of at this point. He would have known that algae are the greatest eaters of carbon dioxide on Earth. And if there is a problem with carbon dioxide, which is what the Earth-Free Institute is working on, it is in the surface level of the ocean, because the ocean can suck down carbon. And in point of fact, 95% of what you breathe out ultimately will wind up in the ocean sediments. That's where we get our oil. So I am honored to be before you today, to be able to give him this award to a man who needs no honor, because he has spoken truth to power in the face of Greenpeace, in the face of Congress, and to all the world. Dr. Patrick Moore.
Thank you so much, Lissa. It is a great honor for me. I have never received such an award, and I've worked all my life in the trenches, so to speak, and it is a wonderful thing to be before such a large audience and to be recognized for the work I've done all my life. I just want to focus on one point in my little acceptance speech, and that is the main point I made before the U.S. Senate Committee on Environment a couple of months ago. The fact is, if you understand the scientific method, which is basically observing nature and being able to replicate those observations and to basically establish causal relationships between one thing and another, This has in no way been performed in the case of climate change. It is virtually impossible to imagine how one would apply the scientific method to climate change for two reasons. First, there are so many variables that we can't control. And when you do an experiment, you have to control all the variables except the one you're studying if you want to get a clean result. There's even variables we don't even understand that we can't control. So it's virtually impossible to think of doing an experiment where we'd be able to tweeze out the impact of CO2 versus the hundreds of other variables at work in a dynamic, real-time, non-linear situation, which is why you could never make a computer model that predicts the climate, because it is not a crystal ball. As a matter of fact, the crystal ball is a mythical object. The second reason is because there's only one planet Earth. If we had 50 planet Earths all identical, and we could make sure that none of the other variables changed while we changed the CO2 level on each of the 50 from low to high, then we might be able to do a statistical analysis of the impact of varying levels of CO2 on global climate, if there was any. But you cannot do statistics on a sample of one. The scientific method is not all-powerful. It has its limitations, and I have outlined two of them that apply directly to the attempt to predict the future climate of planet Earth. It is, in fact, impossible. Maybe someone will make a lucky or even educated guess that actually turns out to be right. But anybody who says they are certain they are right is making a political opinion rather than stating a science fact. As you know, the president seems to think it is sufficient to say science is science, or the science is settled, or all you have to do is look at the science. All you have to do is look at the facts. Those are information-free statements. They have absolutely no meaning whatsoever. Saying science is like saying energy is energy, or that table is a table. There's nothing there. It's a hollow statement with no content. And that is the problem, is that people seem to be willing to just say the science is settled and that's the end of it. And that's what we are up against and must struggle against. And would they please teach our children the scientific method, the carbon cycle, critical thinking, the idea that it isn't black and white. Please change the way our kids are being taught about this subject, because if we don't, there will be a whole generation of people who are just blindly following this climate hysteria, which hopefully will be proven in time sufficiently well to not be a crisis that people will wake up more and more every year as time goes on. I fear a global cooling. It would be okay if there was only 100 million people, like there was during the last glaciation, if there was global cooling. They managed to survive through it somehow. But if there was global cooling today and agricultural productivity collapsed, then it would be a serious crisis. But if it warms 2 degrees, hopefully more in Canada in the north, where 5 million years ago the Arctic islands were covered in subtropical forests with giant camels roaming around in them, that could happen again. Maybe it would be a good thing if it did. So let's hope for a little warming as opposed to a little cooling. If it stays just like it is, I guess that's okay, but I'd rather it got a little warmer. There's only one perfect climate on this earth. That's at 5,000 to 7,000 feet in the tropical mountains, like Cuernavaca, the city of eternal spring. Everywhere else, it's either too hot or too damn cold for part of the year. So let's not think there's some kind of perfect climate for this Earth, but let's recognize that we're in a colder period now than through almost the entire history of modern life, 500 million years of history, and warm would be better than cold. Thank you.